Alrighty, folks. Sorry for the quick stream coming up here. Or somewhat unexpected, I guess. Had a listen. This will do. Hey, Bomb57, how are you doing? And for some reason, OBS is not picking up my desktop audio. It's fine, I guess. Well, whatever. You guys are just gonna have to, I guess, live with not having music for the stream. I mean, with Twitch's recent changes anyway. So, let's have a look. Can you fine folks hear me? Apparently you can. So, how's everybody doing? Yes indeed, Vinny. Hype indeed, I guess. Although, that's not the point. Hey, Hadoken57. X-Plane 11 R hat. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Howdy there. Welcome, Real to Sim. How are you doing? So, what was I talking about? Right. Good. Hope you had fun. Well, hope you had fun as well. Okay. Okay. So, what are we talking about today? We're gonna, I guess. I mean, what I can do is I can just go ahead and disable the GPS units. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about, well, still somewhat inertial navigation, but mostly not inertial anymore. So we're talking about the capability of the FMS. So there's roughly two kinds of systems in the aircraft. Also currently doing flying the TBM over the Alps. Great to hear, real time. Be having fun. Anyway, so there's approximately two systems in the aircraft. Well, two systems is kind of oversimplifying it a lot. So the aircraft essentially, so there's several systems that are designed for position keeping, and yep, IRS position tuning via Navaids. Cool. So there are several systems in the aircraft that are gonna give you your current position, right? One of the most basic ones, well, basic, I mean, these things used to be unavailable not that long ago, but one of the sort of most fundamental for the aircraft is the inertial reference system, IRS or inertial reference unit. Doesn't really matter what you call it. That's pretty much what we're talking about here, right? So it's a system that is capable of tracking your position given an initial position and some math, but it is able to track your position completely independent of any external inputs, right? So that's the reason basically why it's called an inertial system, is because it is completely based upon the assumption that you are in an inertial state, more or less. Rather, it's more about you're in an inertial confined environment, an inertial system, right? And meaning the aircraft is, and any accelerations that it feels that the system perceives, or any rotations which are non-inertial motion, it is able to compensate for. It is able to essentially count them up. This fancy way for saying counting up in mathematics is called integrating. So it integrates all your positional changes, all the non-inertial motions of the aircraft, to construct an inertially constructed path from your starting position. Now the problem is that kind of a system, and you can see it working right here. This is basically, so that's what this data display here for the inertial reference systems is showing you, is this is essentially the internal state of the IRU, and is effectively giving you the output of the IRU state. But fundamentally, the IRU essentially keeps track of two parts. It keeps an inertial only solution, and then it keeps called a hybrid GPS solution. For the moment, we will essentially just ignore that hybrid GPS solution, and we'll only look at the inertial state or inertial solution. Right here, you can see a little HERR, or H error, horizontal error. That is only a debug printout. That's not something the IRS knows. So it essentially has no clue about that. It doesn't know that information at all. All it knows is its current position estimation. It has what are called quaternions for tracking its spatial orientation. And it has some accelerometer readings. So these are your inputs. These guys up here are the gyro rates and the accelerometer readings that the inertial system is tracking in its internal sensors. Now, importantly, these two big boxes here are completely independent of external stimuli or external state of the aircraft. It doesn't matter if there's atmosphere around the aircraft or if there's truckloads of interference, if you're being, sitting in a GPS denied environment, there's jamming, nothing like that is important. These guys are completely self-contained, but always essentially are able to provide inputs. Now, the problem is, although on a sort of short-term scale, these are extremely accurate, right? So the body rotation rates and the accelerometer rates are extremely accurate. The problem is that over time, you get error buildup in them. Eventually, the errors out of here are going to bleed through to your position estimation, and therefore, the thing will eventually drift out of what's called, well, I guess it's not quite out of alignment. That's not really a thing. It's more, yeah, those units are super expensive. Yeah, one of these things will cost you easily, 40, 50 G's, 40, 50 grand. So eventually, your position is what's called diverge. It will diverge from your real position. And right here, I've essentially had the most perfect alignment that I could have gotten, because essentially I've done the alignment in a kind of like just speed it up kind of a way, and because I didn't have time to during debug to wait for the alignment, and there is no wind, there's no turbulence, nothing. So I have minuscule tilt errors here. That's what these are. So this, after the slash, there are what's called tilt errors. So that is essentially the aircraft, how much misaligned is it on the pitch and roll axis versus the reality. And the reason why that is important is because any kind of misalignment will cause the gravitational acceleration of that the aircraft is experiencing due to being on Earth. These will get integrated into your horizontal component. So the vertical component we can tune. We can essentially constrain vertically quite easily, because ADS inputs here means air data system. So the inertial reference units are actually receiving the altitude readings that we are seeing here on the altimeter. They're using those, but at the same time, there's no way to constrain your horizontal position trivially, right? Inertially anyway. So because gravity only points up and down, it doesn't point sideways. So the only way to constrain your horizontal position, well, there's no way, essentially. These errors will eventually build up. There is, if you design your axes and if you design your mathematics around this correctly, you will get what's called a Schuler tuned pendulum here, which essentially means that this horizontal error will eventually, it will not exponentially grow. It will essentially grow in a linear fashion, because of the fact, well, essentially it'll sort of self-correct its own tilt error. But the larger these errors are, the faster this horizontal error will build up over time. So let's assume that there is no GPS. In fact, what I can do is I can go in, yeah, sure, whatever. GPS 1 and 2. We'll just go and press these two buttons, that and that. And you'll see right here, essentially what I did is I pulled the breakers on the GPS units. The breakers are simulated, but they're not right now in my copy. They're not tied up to the animations here in the cockpit or the manipulators. So happy GPS Tuesday to you. Thank you, John Fly. Happy Tuesday to you too, GPS Tuesday. So essentially what I've done is just pull the breakers on the GPS receivers, so the GPS inputs have gone away, and right now the system is essentially fully in inertial mode. It is still has some estimate here on the inertial position, but whatever. Well, for now, we will ignore that and we will look at a different kind of, we'll essentially assume right now we have no GPS input, right? So we have no external system that'll be tuning. Sorry about that. I'm going to readjust the camera here because it's kind of falling away. So there is nothing giving us a way to essentially constrain the position right here. So the way that the inertial reference unit is not able to really cope with that, right? So it's at this point the inertial reference units, let's assume that they are in inertial only mode, and that's all they'll ever give. They produce what's called a horizontal figure of merit, HFOM. Anywhere you see an FOM value, that means figure of merit. Figure of merit is 95% probability that we are within that distance from whatever reference point or from whatever value the system is given out. Marine Aerospace Engineer Avionics text. Great info. Replacing the units, it's simple, but if the tray is being replaced, it's a pain basically. After, yep, exactly. As your slight misalignment of the tray will lead to tremendous errors. Yes, away he flies. I'm not an aerospace engineer. I'm a software engineer, but I've had to study all of this stuff while coding this, so it's kind of fresh in my head. Yes, so they are. So yeah, exactly. So when you have to reinstall an IRS, if you ever have to touch the mounting tray, there's a calibration procedure that has to be done, and on the Laser F6, which is the system simulated here, so the Honeywell Laser F6, you might have seen that or heard about that. Laser F is a pretty well-known brand in the IRS industry, and so the Laser F6 has what's called an aircraft personality module, APM. It's a little kind of box like that, about that size, connected through I think a serial connection to the unit, and what it gives is what's called the Euler angles for the tray misalignment. So you would, if you were swapping the tray, you would be programming the tray misalignment. If you did a calibration procedure on the tray, you would put that information into the APM. Oh, thanks for a follow, audio head. You would put that information into the APM, and I think I got another follow here just a second ago. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong info there. There we go. Phoenix DE. Thanks for following. Sorry about that. I kind of missed that. Anyway, so you'll put that information into the APM, and the APM puts that into the IRS, and the IRS then does put that into the position integration. And we are actually doing the proper math here to do all the position integration. So that's why these errors kind of build up naturally. Anyway, so what was it talking about? Right. If the IRS does not have GPS inputs, thank you, doing well. How about yourself, Phoenix DE? So if the IRS does not have any, let's say, additional input, that's all it can produce. It can really just produce that best guess position, and that's it. Now, the FMCs, however, or FMS, Flight Management System, Flight Management Computer, doesn't really matter what you call it. The Flight Management Computer receives the positions out of the IRSs, or yeah, there are 3 flight management systems, by the way, flight management computers on here, and we can look at each of these guys. And I'm going to unpause this. So this is what these guys are doing right now. They are tracking the position of the aircraft sort of independently what the IRSs are doing. Got the TBM a couple of days ago. Really like it. Oh, cool. Hope you're going to have fun with it. And you'll learn something from it. I don't know, something like that. Hopefully you're going to have fun. So the system here, what it does is it's effectively a second order position estimation after the IRSs have done their thing. Now, crucially, what you don't see quite here is that the FMC position, FMC1 position Kalman filter, what it does is it actually integrates many sources of positional information. It's not just from one IRS. The aircraft has, if I bring all the other ones up, the aircraft has, we are simulating all 3 IRUs, all 3 inertial reference units. So there's IRUs 1, 2, and 3. So you can see that they each independently track position. They each have their own positional error values and whatever. And they each have their own misalignment and blah, 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 whatever. So they each track. Hey, Arden's a simulation. Yep, it's been a while. They each track their own positions. So what the FMS does is it effectively takes all three positions, and there are some rules for when it can take all three and when it only takes one of them. It's somewhat non-trivial, but there are rules for when it can take all three. And trivially speaking, if you just wanted to, take the IRS position, take all three, mix them together, you'll get a position estimate. Now, it's called sensor fusion, by the way, where you take multiple separate sensors and you put them all together. But there's more. How does the FMS determine which IRS to trust more and which one less? So the way it does it is the FMS takes a look at these HFOM values, horizontal figure of merit. Right now it's at 1.54 kilometers for the inertial only solution, 50 meters for the GPS hybrid solution, and slowly going up because I've turned off GPS inputs. So the IRS right now has no additional sources of corrections for its position. So all it can say is literally just, well, I think I'm 60 meters, and it basically just grows over time. Now this estimate here grows over time because of the fact that the declared accuracy of the IRS is, the declared 95% probability drift error of the IRS is 2 nautical miles per minute. 2 nautical miles per hour. And that means effectively about 1 meter per second of figure of merit growth. So with that information in hand, what the FMC can do is they're going to just, weight which one it trusts more and take that. But, hey, 22 Whiskey, how are you doing? But there is more to that than meets the eye. So, one of the problems is that what if you have no additional source of information? You have 3 IRSs, and what if they're all drifting in the same direction? Can happen, you got a common misalignment or kind of some sort of a systematic error where all 3 IRSs just want to go in one direction from the sort of real position of the aircraft. Now what do you do? So what the FMS can do is, as an additional source of information, it actually also takes its own GPS measurements on its own as well and mixes those in. But right now I've turned off GPS for the entire aircraft, so no GPS receiver. Right now you can see it if I go and bring up the GPS status screen here. No satellites are being received because I've literally just yanked power out of it. So now the FMS has to use some other form of refinement. And one form of refinement for the position is you can't directly force the IRS to shift positions in its internal state. There's no protocol for that. But what you can do is you can look at where the IRS says that you should be. Let's say right now the IRS, let's say IRS blah blah blah, IRU number 1 says that right now we should be, here somewhere, latitude, longitude, or rather, it's going to take the GPS hybrid input when it's available. So it's going to look at it and thinks, okay, we should be here somewhere. But what if we are mistaken? Something, right? So then what you can do is you can take a look at some other source of information for where you should be. You'll take something like a Navaid. Let's say you have a VOR DME station somewhere, and off of a VOR DME, you're able to get your bearing from the station and a distance from the station, crucially. So how does that work? It essentially calculates a position solution for this is the VOR DME position solution right here. So IRS says we are at 4871, 4291. VOR DME solution, well, this only updates about twice a second, so we don't get updates quite that frequently here, but it says we're there, and it says that we are there with a figure of merit of 946.7 meters. So the IRS solution, the correction solution tells you also where you should be, and also with what level of certainty you should be there. So based on the position here, or I'm sorry, the estimated position and the position coming off the IRU, what you can do is you can construct a difference, right? This a correction delta. And so that's what these are. And we filter these again because we have to have a certain, we have to have some measure of quantifying that value, and we have to wash it through some filtering because these values can drift over time. They can change. They'll have noise in them and that kind of stuff. So we'll wash it through another common filter, the correction value. And the amount of washing through the filter we do is we take this figure of merit, we convert that into a variance, which is we'll divide it by 2 to get the standard deviation, then power of 2, and that'll give you your what's called variance. And this is what that sort of bracketed thing down here in the parentheses are. That's the measurement covariance. So that is our last VOR DME update. Now this is kind of more complicated because it includes some more sensors in there, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that bridge in a second here. So it knows these are our measurement covariances. So that's essentially the higher this value is, the less trustworthy we are, the less trusting of that measurement that we are. So we want this value to be as low as possible. It cannot be 0. There's no such thing as perfect knowledge in filtering, but there is, you can approach 0 covariance where it will be extremely accurate. So what the filter here does is it takes a look at these values, it looks at the current state of the filter, and it knows, okay, I'm getting a measurement here. You can watch these black dots here. Those are your measurements. Those are essentially how, and I'm going to make it a little bit larger so you can actually see what's going on there. Those are your measurements coming from the VOR DME position determination, or rather, it's the measurement is the VOR DME position determination calculates the position, compares to the IRU, calculates the delta, and that it's that change, it's that displacement change is what gets washed in here, right? That's the north-south displacement, east-west displacement. It also calculates a change of displacement rate, or rather a rate of change, right? So if the IRU is consistently drifting in some direction, then we will pick up that drift. Right now you can see that we are in that color line here. What it means is essentially what the filter thinks is the best estimate of the value of either the absolute displacement error or the displacement rate error, or the displacement rate of growth. And you can see right now we are slowly drifting to the north. Well, it's kind of reversing just about. And we are slowly drifting to the east. No, to the west. And negative value will be to the south, and negative value here will be to the west. So right now it thinks that the IRU positions are slowly drifting to the west and now slowly into the north. Now these values are extremely low, and they will be fairly low. Your typical IRU drift is going to be no more than maybe 1/10 of a meter per second. I need to actually tighten these up a little bit more. Eventually, though, let's say we don't have updates coming in, so these black dots are going to go away because we have no Navaids close by, nothing like that. What the filter then does is, in lieu of measurement updates, these values, these sort of state values, you can see that they're slowly actually growing, unless right now we're updating them twice a second, but if we weren't updating this value here is actually going to start going up. And that's essentially the filter telling you, hey, I'm not getting any updates, any new info on what the actual status is. So what it's going to do is it's just going to keep updating the best prediction based on the rates, but it is essentially just guessing at the value. And the longer it guesses at the value, the less trusting it becomes of the value. And so you'll see down here, so it's essentially this here drift value, and then we have rate. So it's essentially the opposite of this filter here. The figure of merit here, you can see right now it's sort of fidgeting around 60 meters, something like that. That's because we have a lot of sort of sources of updates coming into the filter. So the filter is fairly certain about where we are within about a 60-meter radius. But if we didn't have any updates, this FOM value is designed so that it grows linearly, again, at about 1 meter per second. And so the longer we are without updates coming into the filter, the less trusting we are of the drift value. Now, at the same time, also the IRS uncertainty is going to grow. So their approximate ratio of mixing is going to be about the same, more or less. Is actually going to slowly drift more towards where the IRS thought it was over time. Should I change that? Should I not change that? Not entirely sure. There's many ways to sort of in this cat. You get the point. Essentially, it's all a statistical game. So right now, you can see over here, we have 211 meters is the figure of merit of each of the inertial reference units. So this is purely inertial coming in here. That's what the inertial reference unit says is its own figure of merit. That's how much it trusts its output. We take our drift value. Actually, I should probably just reverse these. So it'll be IRS1, drift, and then corrected position at the bottom. They'll take the drift value here, look at the drift value, add that onto the position. So basically you're flying from midway to flying in southern direction. Yeah, yes, exactly. The figure of merit is just going to keep on rising because it has no source of updating. It has no clue whether what it's estimating is actually true. And the longer the time goes on, the less trusting you should be of that value. So it essentially right now adds in the drift onto the IRS position, again weighting these values together. So it's not just a matter of adding on. What it actually does, it takes a look at the IRS position, adds on these drift values, constructs a new position, and then based on their relative figures of merit, their trustworthiness, so to speak, it'll mix them together and calculate a middle value somewhere in between the two, and then that will get integrated into the corrected position here. And the corrected position, you can see this, actually its figure of merit is less than either of these two. Why is that? Well, because we're essentially mixing two values that we have some amount of trust in one value, we have more trust in another value, which means the combined trust is actually better than either estimate on its own. Maybe wishful thinking, but I wish you developed content for P3D in most detailed in that sort of development was creating content for flight sim. Never seen the most detailed and in-depth research and development I've seen in creating content for flight sim. Notably, I explained. Hey, thanks. November 978 Papa Juliet. So eventually it comes out with the corrected position. Right now we are sort of below a sort of even reporting value for these tiny offsets here. So it's less than 0.001 degree of angular displacement on the planet. But the point is that we are essentially correcting this error value here. Right now we are horizontally error value of 62 meters, and it's slowly going up. So this is actual true error. Again, this is just debug output. We wouldn't actually know that in the aircraft really. And so right now the filter says that we are correcting by about 20 meters back. So we would probably have about 40 meters of error value here. And the figure of merit right now is 62 meters. So give or take. So we are still within the figure of merit value. And this, as you can see, it's going up. So it's probably like 30 meters being corrected right now. I should probably make this a combined value so it's a little bit easier. And we just saw a retune there. Okay, so let's talk about what I actually wanted to talk about today. How do we pick which VORs? Now, I was talking about the simple case, VOR DME corrections. So VOR DME, you have one station, you always get position and distance off of that, or direction and distance off of that, so it's easy to determine. But there's a second kind of updates that are being actually integrated into this drift value here. That figure of merit is actually based on two types of updates coming from both the VOR DME correction and the DME DME correction. Now the DME DME correction is a little bit more complicated. DME DME, one of the nice things about, you can see right here, the VOR figure of merit is pretty huge. It's 1288 meters. So we are within about a 2.5 kilometer circle with 95% probability off of that VOR. Why is that? Well, because we are correcting off of a VOR. What the system has determined, the nearest VOR, or the most suitable one anyway, is this one right here, BNO. And the way that it determines that, it actually constructs a VOR candidate list here. There's some others right here getting a little bit higher quality, but it will actually delay tuning those until it is sort of certain. There's some hysteresis essentially is trying to prevent excessively quick tuning, and so, or excessively frequent tuning. So right now we are saying that we are 75 kilometers off of that. The distance to go is DTG, that's what it stands for. Distance to go, the DME measurement off of BNO is 74.5 kilometers. We are on radial 130.1, and we therefore say, that's about yay, right? And it says right now with the estimation, we are guessing that we are within about a 2.5 kilometer diameter circle with 95% probability. Now the problem is that is a lot of error. That is a lot of uncertainty. So and the main reason for this figure of merit being so high is not because of the DME measurement. The DME measurement is a lot more accurate. It's about 10 times more accurate. The problem is this here: the radials off of a VOR are fairly not trustworthy. You know, a good radial is going to be within about 0.3 degrees, but for safety reasons, we can only assume about a 1 degree. We are within essentially 1 degrees either side of that radial, and so there is a lot of uncertainty that we are essentially deriving from the fact that this is a VOR bearing. DME is fairly accurate. It's within a couple hundred meters. This should be a lot lower. So that's why we have DME updating, which is a lot more accurate, and it essentially works by taking two DME stations that are somewhat far apart, and it's constructing a pair of circles that are based around our measured time delay, or the DME measurement off of there, and it's then calculating the two possible intersections where we are. Now, before it actually picks those up, there's a lot of sort of washing and selection of these DME candidates that is sort of non-trivial, and it's down here and somewhat more spread over, but essentially what it does is it looks at all kinds of DMEs in the area, not just VOR DMEs. It could be an ILS DME, it could be a standalone DME. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's a DME and we have it in the database, it's a good thing. It'll look, first of all, for each one of these guys individually, it'll qualify its own quality of reception. The quality rating here is essentially how far away we are from the station divided by its declared service volume. So let's say Juliet Alpha November VOR here. Where are you? There you are. This guy. We are, some distance away from that station, and it basically says right now 76% says we are. What's our measurement here? It basically looks at it as the inverse of the ratio of the service volume. Yes, that. So the closer we are to the station relative to its service volume, the better. The closer we are to the edge of the station, the closer to 0% quality we are. So we are essentially 76. We are 25% of the distance of the service volume, essentially 1/4 of the distance of the service volume of the VOR here. So this guy right now, I don't know, he's like 70, 60 something kilometers away. So presumably the VOR declared range is something like, I don't know, 200, 300 kilometers, something like that. I have to look in the database, I don't care. So that's how it determines this, but that's just the raw Navaid value. For DME, we also need another parameter, and that is the encounter geometry. That's this angle phi. And because we need two DMEs, we need to pick the two best DMEs that are going to be, first of all, have sufficiently good signal level, right? And this actually does take into account, well, not this is the estimation, but the actual signal reception levels are taken into account, terrain masking, that kind of stuff. Already talked to death about that. This is not stock X-Plane, I can tell you that much. This is all custom stuff. It looks at the quality of reception between either DME, and it basically takes the lower value of the two. So the worst one of the two is going to determine the ultimate sort of signal reception quality of that DME pair. One more thing, it actually looks for a list of DMEs within about 160 nautical mile radius. That's by standard. Then it picks out the 32 closest or the 32 highest quality, and for each of those, it does it does effectively an encounter geometry check. So it looks at our current best guess FMS position, which is right here, and then for each of those, it constructs a vector and it calculates the encounter geometry between the two DMEs. So we have 32 DME candidates up to, and if it's a combination of 32 pick two unique combinations. Order doesn't matter. So that is about 500 encounter geometries that it checks every about 5 seconds, and it calculates both the phi value, which is the angle, and that phi value then gets factored into the ultimate quality. So half of this quality value is based on the quality of the reception of the Navaid, and the other half is based upon the quality of the encounter geometry. It will not consider encounter geometries that are below a certain angle. So less than 30 degrees or more than 150 degrees apart from each other, it will straight up just reject those. Those are just not suitable for DME updates. And as close as we can get to 90 degrees and as high a signal level we can get off the DME based on certain weightings, it will determine the quality. Then it'll sort that list. Highest quality sort of geometries are going to get put at the top of the list. Same for here for VOR. And then it picks the top sort of contender there. Now, that is for, you can see right here, this is the boxed guy right here is the one that we have picked. If I pause it, you'll see that these values are eventually going to, you see that they're just changed. So every 5 seconds we re-examine the encounter geometries. Now there are disqualifying criteria for many of these sort of picks. So first disqualifying criterion is outside of service volume. So even though we are looking for DMEs that are up to 160 nautical miles away, if we have for each of these DMEs, let's say I'm going to have a look at, let's say less custom data, Earth Nav, and I'm going to look for the Juliet Alpha November. There you go. Juliet Alpha November VOR. And here we have line type 12. That means paired VOR DME. And we have our position here. It'll actually also check to make sure when it does a VOR DME check, it checks that it has a VOR and DME co-located within 100 meters of each other, meaning essentially that they are the same station, because otherwise you wouldn't want to accidentally try and tune a VOR that happens to just have the same identifier with it as a different DME. And it looks at this thing here. It's called the service volume. This isn't nautical miles. The service volume is the declared reception limit for the station. Now it will immediately exclude if we are outside of that service volume for the DME. That'll just not get put in the list. Next, it'll check whether, based on our FMS position, we are less than 3 nautical miles estimated to the DME. That is too close to the DME. Essentially, it would result in some excessively steep encounter angles, and it's very, very fast change rates if we were very, very close in. It'll discard those as well. Next, it looks at this here, 420. That is the elevation above mean sea level for the station. And it looks at our actual altitude here, 35,000 feet. It knows the approximate distance that we are from the station. It'll actually calculate the slant angle. Again, standard for DME navigation says no more than 40 degrees of slant angle allowed. Otherwise, the DME is considered unreliable. Same for the VOR. So it'll exclude those as well. Now, finally, after it has sort of picked a candidate here, it'll try and tune that. So you can see that right now it has tuned NIT VOR 116.5, and it's also tuned 110.4, which should be FMD VOR. Let me just unpause this, and you can see it takes a little while for the value here to appear. So it immediately tunes that in, but for the way that radio tuning works, a DME is going to start giving you a distance to go calculation within about 0.1 seconds. It's extremely quick. It locks on really, really fast. But the problem is, just knowing the station value or the station frequency does not mean that you're actually receiving the station. So what the system actually does is it listens for you for about 5 seconds. It takes about 5 to 7 seconds for the audio ID to come through on the received signal, and it'll check that the audio ID is confirmed to what we expect to be seeing in the database here. So if I go and look for FMD, we would expect that to be, this is the audio ID that we expect to see, FMD, on frequency 110.40. So it'll tune that in and see that, okay, radio's reading that in. We have a distance to go value, but it'll wait for until that until that audio ID is confirmed. Only then it'll trust that distance to go value. And so with all of that in hand, it'll it'll calculate the encounter. So it'll basically do a slant correction. It'll do some earth curvature correction. It'll calculate 2 encounter points between those 2 DMEs, right? So it'll look at what the actual distance measurement is. So it says 64,556 meters and 89,444. It knows the position of the station here. So station position here, station number 2 is at 48, well, blah blah blah, whatever. The other one is over here. It'll do a position calculation, which is the output over here, and it'll also staple a figure of merit value to that. Now, how does it determine that? It determines this. There is essentially a declared standard that says 0.175 nautical miles is the declared trustworthy value for a DME at any distance. But it also knows how far away from exactly perpendicular of an encounter geometry we are. Essentially, it does that not by looking over here. This is an estimated value from the database. It'll actually do a distance measurement based on their positions, determine this, and it goes from the measured position to estimate the encounter geometry angle. And based on those, it'll actually either inflate that figure of merit value up in that it's less trustworthy if the encounter angle is very acute, or if it's very, very, very close to being perfectly perpendicular, you're going to be very close to getting that exact 0.175 nautical miles of figure of merit. So as we are slowly moving away from the optimum encounter geometry, away from exactly 90 degrees, this value is slowly going to go up. And if right now we have truckloads of DMEs to pick from, so you can see that there's tons of them very close to 90 degrees. But if you only had, 2 or 3 DMEs, you might very well have to settle for a suboptimal encounter geometry. And actually, we're going to play around with that a little bit later in the sim. All you folks you're very, very quiet in chat. Am I so interesting when I'm talking? Anyway, so it calculates that value. So this is the final DME position estimation figure of merit. It looks at VOR DME position estimation figure of merit, throws all of that into a big bowl, mixes those together, comes out with a new position and a figure of merit that is actually better than either one of these. It actually is, and that gets mixed into the drift rate value here. And right now it's slowly sort of fidgeting around there. So this is roughly the, actually I can show you what the figure of merit value is. Blah, 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 the combined measurement. I actually haven't printed that out anywhere, so we need to calculate it, which we can quite easily do. Here we go, 26,531. Why is this window so large? It should have reset. Whatever. 26,557. So we can actually figure out the figure of merit that came out of the combined measurement of DME, and VOR DME. We need to take this, take the square root of that. So 26,557, 26,557.91, whatever, doesn't really matter the detail there. 162 and times 2 is in order to convert it right now, because the way that this is actually covariance or variance of the value. Variance is the square of the standard deviation. So if we take the square root of that, we get standard deviation. That's about 67% probability. And if we multiply that by 2 because we are assuming a standard distribution or Gaussian distribution. The input figure of merit, which is 95% probability thereabouts, is 325 meters. You can see it's actually even better than the DME estimation on its own, because we have also taken the VOR DME input and mixed that in. So this is all just mixing and taking all kinds of stuff. We're essentially cooking up a big lunch here. To replace our engineers where they work. It's just jaw dropping impressive. Love your attention to detail. Well, essentially what I'm doing is by the way, one more thing I wanted to mention here. So DME estimation, right? I've sort of glossed over that. One more. Bike 512 Live. I would love to do what you do, but I'm not. Always lacking learning basics programming ABAP. Oh man, ABAP and SAP. Oh, I know that. I've had to deal with that a little bit. I'd love to do something in Java and C++. It's positional salad. Essentially, yeah, we're tossing up a very big positional salad here. So once it has the DME, right? How did it arrive at this value? Because one of the problems with DME estimation is you take 2 points, you draw 2 circles, you always get 2 intersects, or 2 intersects of circles that are intersecting, right? You can get one intersecting point where they just touch, but the general case is you're going to get 2 points. So now what do you do? How do you determine which one is applicable? Any takers? You just read data, you get your position, right? Yes. POM 57, I know. Guesses, yeah. No other takers. You cannot average it because one of the positions is exactly where you are and the other one is way off in the distance. So say for instance, we have this guy, NIT down here, and FMD, right? So these are right now what we're using for position estimation. Draw a circle where we are, so there and there. One is here, and the other encounter is actually down here somewhere. So that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is you have to have some sort of a tiebreaker there. The tiebreaker right now is your estimated FMS position. So it actually needs something to guess at which one is more probable. So it'll basically measure the distance to each guess. It'll say, okay, I'm 100 meters away from here, and I'm 100 kilometers away from the other guy. So it's probably the closer one. But what if your figure of merit is, let's say, 20 kilometers? Let's say your FMS position figure of merit here right now. We also know our positional accuracy in the FMS. What if our FMS position is 20 kilometers? And we get a solution that is 20 meters away, and we get a solution that is 2 kilometers away. Which one's the true one? Or let's say we get a positional solution that is 200 meters away, and the other one that is 2 kilometers away. So which one is the real one? At that point, the system actually what it'll do is it'll look at the closest one and the further one, and it'll check which one. If only one sits, it'll basically check to make sure that at least one of them is outside of our figure of merit on our estimated position right now. So it is basically making sure that within our positional uncertainty, we don't get 2 solutions, because if we are, we can't tell which one is applicable. The VOR DME station can do a tie break there, because VOR DME only gives you 1 solution. It's only 1 radial and 1 distance. So there's clear tiebreaker there. But if we don't have that, and we only have DME, we cannot do a tie break in certain corner cases. Same thing for if the encounter geometry is too extreme. Let's say we are less than 30 degrees away. The measurement is, let's say, from here, JAN at NIT. Let's say we were a little bit further out. It'd be less than 30 degrees away. The intersections of the circles are just too uncertain, and the positional uncertainty here would be just massive. So we cannot be quite certain. Let's say you have 2 stations that are right on top of each other. For whatever reason, you can end up with an almost infinite number of solutions along the entire perimeter. So at that point, you just have to call it quits and say, I don't know. So at that point, DME updating will fail. It'll just straight up not produce a value here, and it's not going to get mixed into the IRS position. You have an ellipse of possible positions, but you don't know your altitude. But if you don't know your altitude, you would end up with effectively an ellipse. It'd be effectively an ellipse. Now DME updating one of the prerequisite. Why didn't you DME? Not enough radios, Pilsner? Yes. Hey, Captain Crash, how are you doing? So I'm gonna explain that in just a sec here, Pilsner. But effectively, the problem is, DME updating and VOR DME as well assumes that you have an air data system on board, a functioning altimeter that actually does measure and give you something that you can look at. So yes, this assumes that you have an altimeter that's working. It does need that. One of the problems is if you, for whatever reason, you have a severely misaligned QNH value or an altimeter setting value, then you can actually get slight tilt errors in the position. And that is essentially accounted for within this figure of merit. You will never get a kilometer of tilt error. That's one of the reasons why you have that 40-degree tilt angle limit, is because you don't want to have excessive tilt angles where any kind of air data system error, altitude error effectively, would give you excessively large positional differences where it would essentially exceed that figure of merit value. Hey, Campia608, welcome. Been listening to the background, very cool stuff. Ooh. So if the altimeter fails, you do not get DME updating. There you go. Byte 512. At that point, though, I think your navigational accuracy is probably one of the lesser problems that you have. Now, what you can do in the Challenger, what you can do is you can go down here. Where are you? There you are. And you'll go up here, and you notice right now we have actually two separate air data systems on board the aircraft. So we have two air data computers, two sets of pitot tubes, actually three sets of pitot tubes, but two sets of pitot tubes, two sets of static ports. So if one side's altimeter reading fails, you'll just go, and now Captain is on ADC 2. And you'll end up with, you only have one air data computer providing data now, so that's why you have that yellow enunciation on both PFDs at this point. This is PFD2, this is PFD1. And you have to kind of take that into account that you don't have cross comparisons anymore. Or if the other guy fails, you'll both switch over to ADC1. So there's a lot of redundancy in the systems, and there's usually a way to get them all back, but there's a limit to how much the system is willing to tolerate. But if you switch over to ADC1, you'll still get altitudes. So with that all in hand, so this is the way that these guys are picked. So why, for example, right now is it not switching over to the other VOR, to the higher rated one? Well, again, because you saw where it takes some amount of time for the digital ID, the audio ID here to be identified, for the station to be sort of locked up and sufficiently trustworthy. It's not so much that the radio part of it takes so long to lock on. The radio part locks on in like half a second. It's the audio ID and confirming that you're actually listening to the correct station, not just somebody where the FMS just tuned something in and it's receiving a bogus signal off of somewhere. The last thing you want to have is that thing to push your aircraft off into space and give you a completely misaligned position here and completely push you off into God knows where. So it basically waits for that audio ID to be received and confirmed that it is the correct station that it is hearing, and then only then will it trust that value. So right now you can see that even though we have a higher quality VOR available to us, it'll wait until that difference between the qualities is at least 10%. Only then will it actually do the switch and retune over to another station to essentially prevent excessive tuning, or we just switch over constantly, because any slight changes in quality estimation is gonna Yeah, you get essentially a flicking constantly between either VORs or DMEs. And so for DME as well, so there's an additional dampening mechanism in that if this list is changing very fast, even like for whatever reason, doesn't really matter why. Yeah, thinking about vulnerabilities and Navaids. Yeah, so if for whatever, well, Pilsnerish, as long as we have GPS, this value actually it will receive that, but it'll essentially be very, very untrustworthy. GPS gives you like a figure of merit of like 2 meters. So essentially, these are going to have tiny, tiny effects on the position compared to GPS. What you want to do is, of course, if you jam GPS, that's another thing. What is the phi value on the DME candidate? So it's Captain Crash, that's the encounter geometry. So as I was talking about, since DME updates, the quality of the update significantly depends upon the geometry of the receiving sort of angles. It takes that phi value and factors that into the quality of the pair. So right now we are navigating off of NIT and FMD here, and it's calculating that estimated positional angle is 83 degrees. And the further away from 90 degrees, which is the optimal encounter geometry, you are, the less quality value it's going to give to that pair, and the lower it's going to sink down into this list. And what I was talking about there is actually a 10-second time delay. Once it tunes something in, it'll actually, even if that something that was tuned in completely falls off the list, it'll wait for at least 10 seconds before trying to tune something else, or for whatever, even if not just completely falls off, but you get something much better all of a sudden. It'll wait for at least 10 seconds, such that it'll give it about 5 to 7 seconds to receive the audio ID, and then it'll use it for at least 3 or 4 seconds to get positional updates here into the filter, and only then will it actually retune and change over to something else. So you get at least some data out of it. Right, and there's one more thing. Top tip: don't overfly war zones. Yes, generally, and with me playing here, we got GPS jammed all over New Mexican or Arizona. Yeah. I know, Captain Crash. The U.S. military playing around with their toys, with their GPS jammers. Yeah. So with that in hand, actually, there's one more thing. Is when it stops receiving a Navaid here, it actually will lose this DTG value or that radial value. Yeah, there you go, radial. It'll actually see that go away. And when it sees that go away, it'll give it a 2-second grace period for the Navaid to come back, essentially. And if the Navaid does not, or is not being received within 2 seconds of it being tuned to, and 10 seconds has at least passed since the tuning attempt was made, then it'll basically mark the Navaid as not available. It could be because you're flying down somewhere in a valley and you get occluded by terrain. It'll see, okay, damn, the Navaid has gone away. So it'll basically throw that away, and it'll mark it as a little time delay here, receive a fail, and it'll see blah blah blah. There we go. It'll see, okay, Navaid frequency is tuned, yes, from the frequency echo. Are we not receiving the parameter, which could be a radial, could be a DME value, whatever. Only so many idiosyncrasies in some of the FMS systems I've seen happen. Yeah. When it sees that, okay, that Navaid has gone away, and it has at least been away for 2 seconds, then it'll mark the Navaid as failed, receive fail. It'll start a new timer, which is a retry delay, and the retry delay is, by default, set to 60 seconds, so this down here. And after 60 seconds, that Navaid is going to get re-promoted back up, and it's going to retry tuning it again. How do you check for terrain occlusion? Ray test? Ha! Byte 512. Complicated stuff. Give me a sec here. I'm just going to turn on some lights, and I'm going to be back in just a sec, and I'm going to explain exactly how that works. Okay, we're back. Apparently we are. Cool. So, how does it test for terrain occlusion? The FMS itself actually does not do that. It's the radio. Hey, Mockney, how are you doing? it's the radio simulation that I don't actually have turned on for debug displays here, but there you could actually get it. It looks at encounter geometry, and it looks at encounter geometry, and I'm sorry, it looks at terrain geometry from X-Plane's terrain DSFs. So it actually looks at the true simulator terrain, and looks at where the Navaid is located, where it looks at where the aircraft is located, looks at things like what the frequency is, wavelength effectively, what the sort of types of terrain are between you and there, what the polarization is, which for VOR is horizontal, for DMEs is I think horizontal, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look at the library. The library actually, you can actually find it's on GitHub. Their lib radio actually open source this piece, and blah blah blah. Now let's look at in the header here. So you'll get, it does a bunch of stuff here, but effectively about once a second it looks at the terrain relief between you and the Navaid. It looks at all the radio parameters, and lastly, it runs it through this thing called ITM, the irregular terrain model. And this is a C++ conversion of some Fortran code I didn't write. U.S. Department of Commerce. Yes, called the Longley-Rice model. So what that is effectively a bunch of math that gives you. Can I some water? So it takes it's a radio model. It's essentially a sort of computational model given terrain shape, given radio propagation environment parameters, and the type of radio. Hey, GDA Jib, how are you doing yourself? Doing well myself. So it looks at all of that, and it calculates a delta signal reception level, a decibel level, effectively, right? So it'll calculate the reception level of whatever the radio signal. Yeah, what am I doing here? There we go. Sorry about that. Doesn't have this built in. I don't know either. Pilsnerish. Yes. Reflection interference would have been possible. So Byte 512 Live, it understands knife edge diffraction. So if there's a sharp edge in a mountain, it actually will diffract off of that. It understands tropospheric reflection of signals. It does not support terrain reflection for non-direct line paths. So it does not understand multipathing problems. The reason for that is effectively multipath is sort of like running this algorithm in ray tracing mode, where you would be calculating many possible encounter geometries, and that is just absolutely not doable in real time. Not a chance. Not in 100 million years. Those kinds of so this Longley-Rice model, by the way, don't think that it's not very accurate. It is, yeah, it is exceptionally accurate, because you look at stuff like this. Longley-Rice is what's used to allocate placement of TV towers and radio towers and cell phone towers and that kind of stuff. So it actually is able to give you, for each of these points, you basically run a Longley-Rice estimation to them, and it'll give you signal reception levels for things like, where do I expect to have cell phone coverage? And companies actually use this model to place multi-million-dollar projects. So don't think this ain't very accurate. It is exceptionally accurate. It's been used for 40 plus years now, so it's got to be doing something right. Yeah, it could be. Pilot Edge does have this because I've integrated that for them. If there was a way to implement LR into VATS and Longrise, you could have a quasi-realistic HF. I guess you could. It's already in Pilot Edge, so I've done it for them. So for on Pilot Edge, your terrain masking and occlusion stuff that is being simulated in real time is not simply line of sight. It actually does take into account things like radio environment. It even takes into account my code here. Understand things like if there is a large body of water between you and the tower, it does change the propagation properties. And it understands, for example, if it is likely to be sweet water or salt water or fresh water. That's one. So fresh water and salt water actually do make a difference. I think we do some estimation changes based for the radio environment based on latitude, but I have to check. I don't remember anymore. Yeah, well, I can show you the algorithm here. I should probably listen to some music. I'll get to that in a sec. Lib radio source, so ITM C interface. So there we go. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, this is just the raw interface. We want to look at that, I think. ITM. Ah, there we go. No, not quite. There we go. Recompute signal. Louder. EX power 10 or 16 watts, also in the plane used. Typical transmission powers in the aircraft, as far as I know, is about 20 to 40 watts. But yeah, there's I don't think we change transmission power based on aircraft type. I have to check though, but I don't think we change it. Right, there we go. So we basically estimate the ratio of how much we consider the water that you are over is ocean, which is to say salt water instead of fresh water, based on distance. So if there's only 40 kilometers of water between you and the transmission tower, we consider that to be almost certainly fresh water. And then we gradually change it over to salt water as the distance increases past about 100 kilometers. Now this is, again, very rough, right? So this is a very, very sort of quick shot. We don't actually look at, the exact type of water that's there, but we sort of estimate that based on the amount of distance accumulated overall that's between you and that transmission tower. For example, maximum distance at which we actually consider radio transmission is 1,000 kilometers. Posted estimates is water. Yeah, at the coast, you see below, really below 40 kilometers, water has very little effect on radio transmission, unless you're like trying to push the radio transmission right through there. It's really when hundreds of kilometers of water are in between you and the transmission tower when this actually does have an effect, or even the effects are fairly small. So if you are at least 60 nautical miles or 100 kilometers away, you've got enough, at least that much water between you and the transmitter. And even then we're talking about, for example, when you're talking about free space propagation where you're at very high altitude and the transmitter is fairly low, the angle is fairly steep, the water is effectively going to have no effect. So this is, we're talking about really the margins of reception. The radio model is almost entirely line of sight until you get to the limits of reception or to occlusion and masking. Never heard this plane released. I love the TBM. Ah, cool. Country aviator. Then curvature. Yes, exactly. Curvature actually will play in this, and even mountains. So if there's, you could be going, flying. That was recently. This, by the way, Country Aviator. This functionality with the radio masking stuff is already in TBM. So the VOR, ILS, and NDB systems are custom simulated, and they are using this kind of radio transmission model, the custom stuff. So I was recently, when I integrated this about 1.5 years ago into the TBM, people were reporting like trouble receiving a VOR when they're flying over. Yep, cool, yeah, that one. Yeah, I also want to get this thing out. I'm super excited about it myself. By the way, for minimum distance here, this is for sort of the minimum distance at which point I think, we either, it's essentially because of spacing and how we sort of generate the points for sampling. Anyway, so the minimum distance where we consider radio calculations is 1,000 meters. any less than that, and we essentially think that you are 1,000 meters away. Anyway, so there was a guy who was reporting that he was having trouble navigating off of Kathmandu VOR over in Nepal because he was flying to Lukla and he was flying at reasonably low altitude in Himalayas is fairly still high. He was at like 16,000 feet or something, and he lost the Kathmandu VOR at, I don't know, 40, 50 miles away, something like that. And it's because of the fact that Kathmandu, if you look at it, it sits in a sort of a bowl of terrain. And so he was just sort of getting peaks through the edges of that bowl. So I guess VNKT or something like that. Something like that, yeah. So Kathmandu VOR is sitting here in sort of a bowl, and it's around there. You have tons and tons of mountains and stuff. So he was flying essentially along this here airway, and roughly about, I don't know, somewhere here he was starting to lose signal because of the fact that I was starting to get occluded by the nearby mountains there. And it wasn't just the fact that the mountains were there, it was just the fact that at this point it was sort of starting to get below curvature of the earth and that kind of stuff. Yeah, when you get to like large distance stuff, minor angle changes can have a lot of effect. We ordered the most expensive edition as soon as I heard about it. I'll still get this plenty. There are only a handful of developers, all for explaining there is opening. Ah, cool. Thank you. Cool. So that's the way that the radio simulation works. So I need to put in the debug display here into the Challenger as well, so you can actually look at it. You can do that today. It's not too hard. Now, what I want to do here. I'm actually going to reduce the brightness so it's not burning my eyes out. Cool. So that's the way that works. Yeah. I ran out of stuff to talk about. We're going to make it so that we don't have ghost people on board with 0 pounds of payload. And the autopilot's going to retrim this back in. During my pilot training, I had to learn how to locate myself in triangulation VRS. It was about 40 miles away in the mountains. I had to climb up to 10,000 to be able to receive it. Yes, that does happen. Or still be busy with fleet that he lacks time to work on challenges, questioning certain rudimentary optics. El Promo, he actually is working on Challenger full time. Well, yeah, pretty much. He only occasionally takes time off to do something other than the Challenger. So we are just about getting ready to switch over from JAN to NIT or something like that, I guess. Here on the VOR stuff. I guess we could turn a little bit to the right here, maybe 10 degrees, and we'll be sort of more flying towards there. That SLC VOR, and then that guy should come up on quality and start being considered. There we go. That's just a retune. You can see right here, there's a JNBNO, and right now it's not receiving the audio ID. So as soon as I unpause it, after a few seconds, you can see that it's already receiving the distance. That's not a problem. Distance measurement off of a DME is fast, but getting the audio ID in to confirm that what you're listening in is the correct station. There we go, finally. So, and you can see now again the drift figure of merit values shrunk back down. For the brief period where we didn't have the figure of merit, it actually started going up because we only had that VOR. There was a VOR retune, and now it's retuning the VOR, and there it is. And it's gonna probably shrink just a little bit. Value is higher than the other guy, so it's not gonna be affected too much. Go too busy, yeah. And this place here is not empty. I'm actually going to put a little graphic here so you can see where the position estimations are. It's just right now I've only been messing around with the stuff here with get rid of you, which is with the digital data output. So yeah, you can see here phi angle is the angle between these stations that it's estimating, 92 degrees, and as soon as it gets to a fairly acute angle, it'll try and find another more suitable target to tune to. So even though you can see right here, there were other values. For example, this guy this guy here is at exactly 9 degrees. WGM PDB. Now WGM is back here somewhere. WGM here. But PTB, I'm guessing, is fairly far away. Might not even be on the map. It's at an almost exact. There we go. There it is. PTB. So it's like down somewhere in Slovenia or something. It's actually not Slovenia. It's gonna be like, I don't know, Croatia. So even though these guys are at an exact 90-degree angle from the air for the aircraft, right? So the encounter angle is almost exactly 90 degrees. They are fairly far away, so they have a fairly low sort of quality rating. But if we had nothing else here, then yes, it would go for that encounter. It would go for that pair. So it's literally just picking its best guesses and its best chances of being able to receive something. Oh yeah, is that in Hungary? Can I not read names? Oh yeah, it is. Sorry about that. Idiot. Sorry. Yeah. Crap. Spilled some water on me. Cool. Yeah. 103 degrees now between these two guys. But still, they are the closest, so they get the highest sort of rating. But if I try to, for example, if I go and turn right here, something like 150, something like that should do it, yeah. We'll try and fly in between them. You'll see that eventually the system is gonna degrade the quality of them fairly low. And something else is gonna be higher rated. As you can see right here, the encounter angle is going up. Their value for navigation is decreasing rapidly. Hey, Reflected Reality, sorry, Mr. Start Stream. Does it prefer DME DME or VOR DME? Well, it prefers neither. It just goes by what's the... it actually mixes all of them. I'm gonna show you... I don't want to basically rehash the full discussion about it, but it does the estimation based on a bunch of parameters. And there we go, it's just retuned. Julie Alpha November TPS. So it does the mixing of the input values based on their figure of merit, which is again calculated, and it's using actual statistical probability calculations for that. So using what's called covariance. So yeah, right now you see it will not pick up, even though these two VORs and DMEs are closest, NIT and SLC, they are nowhere on this list. There's no NIT SLC pair here because the encounter angle is so oblique that essentially it degrades the quality of the encounter terribly. Wait, so the encounter angle is not the angle that depends on the height of the airplane. No. Yes, it's the angle between the two DMEs. So at the estimated position of the aircraft, roughly, we guess we are here somewhere. It calculates the expected encounter angle between these two VORs. So essentially this phi angle here. So from SLC to the aircraft and from NIT to the aircraft, and it'll calculate the relative angle between them. That's what that phi value is. And you want it as close as possible to 90 degrees because that's where you get the highest accuracy. Make sense? And the further away from 90 degrees that you are, the less accurate that the measurement is. Yes. Yes, exactly. If I have my tablet handy? I can get it. In 2 dimensions, Pilsnerish, it levels them. So essentially the encounter angle is calculated based on, it's essentially a 2-dimensional kind of a solution. So it considers sort of a flat map projection. And actually, which projection does it use? I'll give you the exact detail here. Give me just a sec. FPP it. And so for the first update, VOR DME, average station, no. There we go. This is the one. So it is using orthographic projection. Yeah, it's effectively as if it was looking on the planet sort of flat on. So it's actually not doing it from the point of view of the VOR. It actually is looking from the point of view of the aircraft. So it positions itself over the aircraft, so to speak, and draws a line to one and the other VOR, and then measures the angle between them. Exact detail, yeah. So it's not, yes, it is a two-dimensional estimation, but it is a two-dimensional estimation because of the fact that it would not make much sense in anything else. So it does construct a projection. How does one get the one angle per DME? Get one angle per DME. You just get into tune in. Hey, welcome, Alime. So it does not. So here's the thing: the angle is not constructed. So we're talking about two types of angles here. We're talking about the angle for the quality estimation here, and that is based on. At least your list shows one per DME. No. It's one per pair. Here, this is always a pair. Pair of DMEs. Okay, I'm gonna break out the tablet here, and I'm gonna show you. Tablet time. Okay. Let's see, am I still on camera? I am. Cool. Yes, it is per DME pair, and it is their relative. I don't know what you call this. What sort of an angle that would be. Anyway, so I'm gonna point this up into the sky so it doesn't consume too much CPU power. I'm gonna go to graphics. Actually, probably be better in Dia. So screw the tablet. Although I can scribble on GIMP. Sure, I'm gonna use GIMP then. GIMP. I'm gonna bring up a new image, 2000 by 1500, something like that. Perfect 4x3 image. Okay. As usual, let's reset the brush to something stupid, but we'll get rid of that. Perfect. So the way it constructs the encounter angle, or calculates the encounter angle, so it needs an anchor point, right? It needs an anchor point, and the anchor point in this case is going to be the FMS position. So, right, let's say it calculates FMS position is over here. That's my Wacom. Cool. And it basically, for that point, it constructs an orthographic projection. Yes. Orthographic projection, by the way, for those who don't know, let's assume that this is the curvature of the Earth. Orthographic projection is just you looking perfectly sort of straight down and just whatever, putting a flat piece of paper on there and just, you know, transferring points like that. That's an orthographic projection. Get rid of that. So right now we're sort of looking down through that orthographic projection. Now let's say that this is at, you know, X north, not M, X north and Y west or whatever, right? So this is, we're going to call it X latitude, Y longitude. This is our aircraft position. We didn't discuss the ME triples yet. The system doesn't do 3 DME solutions, only 2 DME solutions. So it's not because I can't code them, it's just that's the way the real aircraft works. So it looks at, let's say we call this station 1, STA1, and then we have STA2, STA2. It does project these points onto the flat plane projection. So this is right now origin point, so this would be 0, 0. And let's say this would be like point 10, 2. And this would be point -4 and 3, something like that, sure. So now these guys represent vectors, right? Now we have 2 vectors there, going from 0, 0 to 10.2, or rather you have 2 vectors. 10, 2, that'll be vector 1, vector 1, vector 2, and the other guy would be -4 and +3. Oh, sister, thanks for a follow. And by the way, the coordinate system that we're using here is going X that way, and y that way, right? So this is flat plane projection. Yeah, so the angle between the two vectors, if you know your, would this be high school stuff? Probably, I don't know. The angle here, which we can call phi, the angle phi is equal to v1 dot product of v2, and this is actually the cosine of the angle. Yes. So this would be your dot product, and notably, you have to understand these are vectors. So cosine of phi is the dot product of these two vectors, and you can actually see that being calculated right here. So it constructs a ortho FPP in it. So ortho flat plane projection initialized at position GO3 to GO2 just means get rid of the altitude part. Grab the FMC position, and this is just setting up some other parameters for the projection. Then goes blah 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 down here. There's some checks for Navaids exclusions and filtering, like 14 here. Learner stuff at latest and introduction of IJK almost threw me away. Yep. So we come down here and we go geo to FPP. So this is your geographic conversion to flat plane projection conversion of coordinates. So it's going to take the coordinates of that Navaid, convert it over to a flat plane projection, and then vector t unit, what it does, I'm sorry, this is one more thing I forgot to put in here. These we actually take unit vectors out of, so this is essentially going to take that divided by v1 scale. So we are going to convert that into v1. I'm going to call it v1 prime, and these are going to take that divided by the scale of 10, comma 2. I'm sorry, 10, comma 2. And divide by scale of that vector again. So these are now going to be unit length vectors. So these are going to have total length of 1. Why am I using the mouse? So these, after conversion to a unit length vector, is going to be 1. And then this is going to hold. You can take two unit vectors, do a dot product between them, which a dot product is defined as basically a field source geometry vector to dot product is just multiply the x's, add in, multiply the y's, and the result is going to be the cosine of this angle phi. Now, cosine of angle is going to need 16 MBP. Yeah, cool. Cool stuff. This though. Way to spend a lot of money. But hopefully it's going to be working for you. Gordon actually runs full-time on a Mac as well. I think they did they bring back the older keyboard? Yes, they did, I think. Anyway, so that the cosine of phi, right? If we look at cosine, the cosine function looks something like this. It's going to be your 90-degree point, 180-degree point, and the cosine function looks like that. Ignore the horrible drawing. 0 degrees. So at 90 degrees, when these guys are exactly perpendicular to each other, so when this is 90 degrees, this is going to be 0, cosine of phi. So cos phi is going to be 0 down here, and it's going to be something else elsewhere. So easy peasy check for that is we'll just take 1 minus that cosine, the absolute value of it actually. So we'll just flip this over, we'll flip that cosine over like that, and we'll take 1 minus, which is going to convert it like that into this kind of a shape. And this here value, when this is 1, this is exactly 90 degrees away from each other. It's essentially the same thing as if it was the sine of phi. Well, sort of. Didn't pursue a career in flight simulation because of your home office is what worked 3 full months in office because of COVID. Yeah, turns out home office worked well for you. Yeah, that's how it works. Anyway, so this is our encounter geometry. So based on the angle here, that is what gets factored into the evaluation here for the quality. It actually takes that, it takes this value. So it's 1 minus the cosine of the phi, blah, 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 whatever value. So the higher this value is to 1, the closer we are to being perfectly perpendicular. And then we also take the minimum of the signal qualities of the DME stations. So if there's 2 DME stations, One is very high quality, one is very low quality. The resulting quality of the pair is going to be the lowest one. So we need two reasonably good stations, and then we need good encounter geometry between them, and that's going to give you a high quality of the encounter, or the pairing here. And we actually then divide this by 2 to make sure that this is between 0 to 1, but it's a little bit easier to print out. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be. The numerical value of that quality is irrelevant. It's just that I like to have that between 0 to 1 to be 0 being completely unusable and 1 being super duper mega perfect, which it will never be. This value will actually never hit 100% because you would have to be within effectively zero distance away from the station. But and since we never allow stations to be less than 3 nautical miles away from us, this value is never going to be 100%. But it's going to be fairly, you're going to have something like 90-95% can happen here. All that we're really looking for is to make sure that there are different values here and that they are something that lets us then apply a quicksort algorithm here that just sorts the nav pairs using a compare function. And the compare function looks like this. It just checks for the highest quality. If this guy is higher quality than that guy, put him left. If this guy is lower quality than the other guy, put him right. So left would be closer to the start of the list. Right would be closer to the end of the list. So highest quality stuff gets put on the start of the list. Lowest quality stuff gets put on the bottom edge of the list. And this is, again, limited to 32 encounter, 32 of the highest quality DMEs that we have in range. So that prevents us from, if there was 100 DMEs, you can end up checking tens of thousands of possible encounter geometries. In fact, I can calculate that. I'll go to Wolfram Alpha, and let's say it's going to be 10 factorial divided by, was it 2 factorial? No, it's m factorial divided by m times 10 minus 2 factorial, I think. Please tell me I'm wrong. 32. I know that should be. What am I doing here? Right? Anybody remember that equation? That's wrong. It's divided by 32 factorial times 32 minus 2 factorial. Combination, pick, whatever. Combinations, and what was the equation again? It's n factorial k minus n minus k factorial. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That's the one. Yeah, so we are constrained to 32 encounters, which is going to give us a maximum of 496 encounter geometries that we're going to examine every 5 seconds. This is just to prevent, the algorithm from spiraling out of control if there's, for whatever reason, thousands of DMEs within range. Let's say if we let this go to 100, then we'd have to examine 5,000 encounter geometries. That's just for like 3 times more VORs. So that's 10 times more work. So we want to constrain this to a reasonable value. And therefore, blah, 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 down here. Yeah, that's basically what that does. Cool beans. So at most 500 encounter geometries for 32 of the most strong, most powerful DME Navaids that we are going to be looking at. Neat, eh? So far, we have corrected drift for 160 meters. So yeah, there we go. If you look at over here, IRS 1, right now, the position has drifted 160.9 meters from our true position. And the correction system drift, the drift correction has already calculated a back correction of 163 meters on the, I think this is the y-axis, and this should be the x-axis. So this would be longitude axis, this would be latitude axis. That effectively has nulled out almost all the drift of the IRU itself, just by using Navaid corrections here. There we go. This is the correction values actually right here. And even if we completely lost Hey, Raphael VIX. Welcome, welcome. So yeah, that is how, and by the way, therefore FMS, figure of merit position, is 1.5 meters. So we are estimate right now, so this is actually a very low value. This is actually somewhat too optimistic. We are probably more than 1.5 meters from our true position, but you know, 1.5 meters, that is effectively like the cabin diameter is almost 3 meters. So how does the IRE track the position, if I may ask? That is complicated by 512. It's very complicated, but it does it essentially the way that the real thing does it as well. It does it by way of yeah, essentially tracking the real thing, just the way the real thing was. So it simulates gyro rates. It just uses these two inputs here, gyro and accelerometer rates. Yep. So the way the inertial reference unit does it is, that was in a previous show, I believe. Lars Rass. Possibly, yeah. I mean, let's have a look. CL21 IRS. Count lines. There's 3,200, 3,300. No, absolutely not. Cajun Josh. So almost nobody uses mechanical gyros these days anymore. Yeah. Yeah. They mechanical gyros have. I'm not like, if you find somebody running a SEMA, they probably still have a mechanical gyro in there. But as far as I know, pretty much everything is these days is what they call a strap down INS. So strap down INS. Blah blah blah. Strap down systems. So strap down systems use effectively solid state kind of deal. And it will be U.S. military. I mean, there might be mechanical gyros in the ICBMs, but that's about it. ICBMs perhaps that were manufactured in the 70s, but even there, I'm pretty sure they will have replaced it with fiber optic or laser. But yeah, that's the way it works. 32-year-old A320, yes, you're gonna have a laser gyro in there. Ring laser gyroscopes have become available about 1975, something, 1976, something like that. Ring laser gyro, thereabouts, roughly in the 70s is when they become commercially available. Ring laser gyros, and here's the amazing thing: they have less than 0.01 degrees per hour of bias. What the hell? That's amazing accuracy. And when were the first ones sort of deployed? That doesn't say. I mean, you can probably find it. Yeah, the sort of mechanical gyro stuff is from the 60s and 70s. And there we go. First one was demonstrated in 1963, but I don't think they were commercially available until the 70s. Like 1972, 73 probably the absolute first ones, commercially available ones. Yeah, that is insanely accurate. These things are trivially able to observe the rotation rate of the planet. In fact, that's how alignment works. Effectively, they're doing what's called gyrocompassing. They're looking for the rotation of the planet to determine which way the aircraft is pointed. So yeah, that's how we do it, and we do it by looking at per frame differences in position for the aircraft in X-plane, and then we calculate between the two frames. We calculate the change in rotation, and that gets fed into the gyro simulation here. There's some noise applied, and then that gets fed into the gyros, which are actually running completely disconnected from the X-Plane's main thread, so you can actually look at. I'm going to show you in the debugger. Why not? So we'll go break into the debugger info threads and blah blah blah, and we'll go and look for the IRS thread. I didn't want to bring you up. I wanted to go in here, IRS or IRU. what did I call you? Ah, there you are. Laser ref 6. So thread 1219, switch to thread 1219. It's probably sitting in some background. Yeah, it's just sitting in Utex EBS time. So it's just waiting, sitting in a delay pause or sleep state. So it runs at, so continue explain, and I can show you it runs at a frequency of 20 microseconds, 20,000 microseconds. So 50. No, hang on. Yeah, 50 hertz. Yes, 50 times a second the CPU is effectively running, and that's when it gets all the updates here for the gyros, integrates those, and gives you a new position update. Actually, should be running those faster. It should run at 100 hertz, but whatever. As long as it works, doesn't really matter. And same thing for the accelerometers. We measure the position of the aircraft, or rather, we compare the position of the aircraft in the current frame versus the previous frame, time delta. And one of the problems is X-Plane is terrible at position integration. So you end up with, if I show you here in the INS autonomous Kalman filter, the accelerations here, this is the noise in the accelerations. They are terrible. This is the rotation rate stuff is trivial. That the noise there is pretty much non-existent or very, very little. But the accelerometer rates in X-Plane are, or not the accelerometer rates, the positional change integration and the time stability of frames is terrible. So you end up with huge changes in accelerometer values. But eventually it sort of evens out because we are effectively still following in the physics input simulation. We are still following the airplane accurately. So these eventually get smoothed out in the filter. But sort of in the sort of raw sense, this looks like 240 meters per second square acceleration. It's like 20 g, or yeah, it's like 20 g's in one direction. It's just because of the inaccuracy of X-Plane's frame timing. Just got yeah, just get the frequency change down to do later. Yeah. Anyway, so that gets evened out, and also the measurement system here actually integrates as well. You can see down here it only has, the other guys here are null, right? So what's the deal here? You can see here null, 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 nothing. But there's one measurement covariance here and one measurement covariance here. What's the deal there? Well, these are in inertial navigation. What you use is you use the what's called northeast down frame of reference or coordinate system, which means latitude and longitude are your north and east directions, and then altitude or the down reference is the altitude negative, effectively. But well, in this case, we have a positive. It doesn't really matter. But the altitude is the only one you can refine using an external sensor in an inertial reference unit, because you have a pitot system. I'm sorry, you have a static system on the aircraft, which gives you independent altitude measurements. Because otherwise, the IRE would just drift away on the vertical axis. Crazy makes me think you're looking at noise coming out of the analog GPIO input. Yeah, pretty much Sisto. So these right here, the rest of these measurement covariances. Measurement covariance means that's the trustworthiness of the measurement from the outside of the filter. But since I'm looking at the autonomous position filter, autonomous means that there's no external inputs coming into that filter, which means there's never any measurement coming in for the lateral position, but there's a measurement coming in for the vertical position, which is the air data system tuning. Cool. Get rid of you. And what did I want to look at over here? But I can show you, for example, the GPS hybrid Kalman filter. Well, right now that guy doesn't have any measurement either because we haven't fed him any GPS positions in a long time. But it also the GPS hybrid filter also includes the air data system altitude as well. Alignment Kalman filter. This is just for when we're in alignment. That doesn't apply right now. And yeah, this is the IRU state. And you can actually, if you bring up the AirInc 429 data browser, you'll type in IRS over here. It's going to give you the output buses of the inertial reference system. So this is your serial bus coming out of the IRS. Though you might enjoy this. And you can see here, these are all the data labels that the IRUs are putting out. And it is actually, I did make sure, we go to info doc, we go to laser ref 6, This is your product description from Honeywell. And you'll go down here into inertial IR ARINC 429 digital outputs. You'll look at octal label. Let's say you want to know your position latitude, octal label 310. So we'll look for octal label 310. I might actually label them differently. Oh, it's using octal label 010. Man, this is a different one. All right, the labels are somewhat misaligned between this and the other one that I was simulating. Anyway, doesn't really matter. Yeah, some of these labels are somewhat different assignments. We don't try to reproduce every label that's coming out of the inertial reference unit, but within reason, you can actually, I mean, we just print out the name of the label anyway, so you can guess at what the value is supposed to be. We also give you a nice formatted display what the value is in the IRU, and so you get things like, lat, long, short, whatever, that's trivial, but you can also go down and get like body pitch rate, body roll rate, body yaw rate. So this is the raw sort of outputs coming from the gyros being fed in, being returned into the other avionics in case you need that. So for example, wait to kind of recreate the interfaces of the hardware. Yes, by 512. Yes, this is all the ARINC data network of the aircraft. So this is the serial data buses of the aircraft. There's about, I don't know, like 150 of them. I can show you the definition file here, ARINC 429 data. This is read by the aircraft avionics to create all data buses. Here you have in little comments describe what's receiving data on that bus and who the sender is. Family was an exec in Honeywell, France back during Cold War. Yep. So, and you can see that as well over here. So for example, what bus did I click on here? So yeah, left IRS 1 is being sent out by IRU/0, which is IRU instance 0, being received by fuel system computer unit channel 0. So the fuel computer actually receives IRS attitude. It actually receives the body acceleration rates. IOC 0, IOC 1, FCC 0, FCC 1. So IOC 0 and 1 are the input-output concentrators. They're essentially like data routers inside of the aircraft. FCCs are your flight control computers for the left side. FCC 0 and 1 is left FCC system A and left FCC system B, or system 1 and 2, I guess. The electrical data bus network impedance load. Oh, that's all, yeah. Yeah, that's in there as well. I haven't put a nice little visualizer for the electrical network, but if you want to look at if you want to graph this data out, I mean, be my guest. I might do that. But yeah, here's the electrical network for the aircraft. So here you have all of your, generator definitions, Gen 1, Gen 2, APU, Gen, ADG, air-driven generator, by the way, this is the RAT generator. External AC, external DC. And we got battery, APU battery, main battery, APU battery. We got ties defined here. So ties are essentially just switches that modeling CAN bus or something similar. It's simulating ARINC 429. So ARINC 429, this guy. ARINC 429 is a serial bus used in aircraft. So yeah, we are not simulating the exact bitwise format here. So I'm sort of taking a simplification there because I don't want to have to be writing parsers and serializers for data formats. So for example, one of the things, if you look at things like, where's my ARINC description? There we go, ARINC 429-16. There we go. For example, if you want to look at, so this are some of the data labels used in general aviation. This is not an exhaustive list, and ARINC allows for, manufacturer specific extensions, that kind of stuff. One of the things is ARINC only recognizes 32-bit data words that are being constantly sent out. So for example, if you want to encode something like VOR ILS frequency, it is encoded in BCD format, and there are 4 significant bits per digit, and it encodes like 3 or 4 digits, something like that. Or you got some stupid crap like ground speed encoded in BCD 0 to 2000 and whole knots, whatever. And then you have more dumb things. Actually, I'm going to show you on the LaserRef description here. In LaserRef, in the IRU, you can actually see here, they'll give you, you know, we have true heading, primary input output, label 314, encoding binary 18 bits, range 0 to 100, and so 0 to minus 180 to plus 180 actually, and it is encoded in LSB weight, which is to say 1 bit change is that many degrees of change, and blah 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 transmission rate. Yeah, so transport delayed 100 milliseconds. You get the point. Essentially, I don't reproduce the binary encoding format here because I'd have to write a serializer, then a deserializer on the other end. Just no. I just for myself, for my purposes. For example, I want to put in a 32-bit floating point value. I just put it on the bus and it comes out the other end perfectly intact. Or I put in a 32-bit number and it comes out the other way intact. I don't have to do like quantization. I might at some point, but that's all just bits of memory. I think you're excused from transport encoding. Please don't torture yourself that much. Anyway, electrical network. Ties. What are ties? Ties are multi-point connections that are configurable by the aircraft. A tie can be something like a contactor. It doesn't make sense since they're actually, a tie can be something like a contactor, which is to say a physical thing that switches. It could be a relay, a multi-point relay, single-point relay, that kind of stuff. Actually, I do have. If we go to CL650 systems doc, I do have a map of the electrical network just drawn out. So yeah, this is all. So this is the electrical. Do I have a picture here? A nicer picture? I don't. Anyway, so this is just the map of the buses. So buses are sort of these thick vertical lines. Then these opening things, these are circuit breakers. For only the irrelevant parts here, you have what a tie looks like. So emergency AC transfer contactor. If we go down here, emergency AC transfer contactor has a tie. And then we go transformer rectifier units, TRU. So that'd be these guys. So TRU1, essential TRU1, TRU2, essential TRU2. So there are 4 TRUs in the aircraft. But you drew that out in DIA. Yeah, yes I did. Yes, I did. And this is the entire electrical network in the aircraft. And it's recalculated 20 times per second, again in the background thread, where it recalculates, okay, what's the applicable source of the electrical power, who's being, what's the mechanical load on the generators, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. TRUs, diodes. Yes, we do have some diodes in here, which are just limiting the way that power is fed. So that, for example, that stops the network integration where it sees, okay, higher voltage here, then okay, power can pass through, but if it's the other way around, then it will not. And finally, the bulk of the file here is these load lines. Load. There's some CBs here, standalone circuit breakers, but the majority of them are loads. And a load is just the device, right? Adding visual to the debug menu would be cool. Yes, I might. Should I just draw? So one of the things that you don't see here is all the endpoints and all the endpoint devices. It's laminar secret weapon. Oh no, all there's thunder. Yeah, unfortunately, it's nowhere near ready for release, so unfortunately that won't be happening. So if we go and egrep, and we'll go CB, or like that, CB, I think we'll find it. Okay, and never mind. That and that, yes, and then we're going to look for load CB. No, we will not find that. Will it understand if I go like that? Yes, cool. So there are 354 endpoint devices and 354 breakers in the aircraft, and they're all simulated. And so that's what all these are. So load defines an endpoint device, let's say a main battery charger. Minimum volts to operate, 40 volts. Stabilized inputs, that means it has a stabilized power supply, which is to say when the load estimation here examines the return value of whatever power is being consumed by the device. And this is tied into the system simulation code here. it assumes that the return value is in watts, and it will automatically compensate for any voltage drop versus the reference value. So it'll basically calculate the amperage or the current being drawn from the bus dynamically based on the input volts. Sadly, a single plane will matter that much. Yeah, unfortunately not. So for example, here we have another guy, display fan. That guy, actually there should be a standard load here. Display fan, that guy only, load CB just means generate a circuit breaker of 3 amps and connect it to the network connect the load to that breaker. It's an AC type load. And because it doesn't have stabilized true, that means that this is an unstabilized power supply. What are stabilized and unstabilized power supplies? Like the Challenger single-handedly trying to maybe. A stabilized power supply. Any electrical guys here in chat, you raise your hands. The stabilized power supply, what it does is effectively a power supply takes a certain amount of input power or a certain amount of input voltage, converts it out to a bunch of output voltages, and supplies power through itself to some endpoint device, chips, could be hard drives, motors, doesn't really matter what it is. A stabilized power supply, what it does is effectively the output is fixed as in terms of the amount of energy that it consumes. Can't freaking wait. Yeah. It consumes a certain amount of power or a certain amount of energy per unit time. And regardless of what the input voltage is, the output power is always the same, right? So what the power supply, or what the stabilized power supply does, for example, like in your computer, is you feed it, regardless of how many volts, it draws as many amps out of the input in order to provide a stable power output. You can only dream of, yeah, I guess. A non-stabilized power supply would be something like an electric motor or a simple heater, right? A resistive heater element. The amount of power going through that heater element is dependent upon the input voltage. Effectively, what it means is that the output, the current flowing through that device is fixed. Let's say you have an electric heater element, simple resistive heater that draws 50 amps, and if you put in 100 volts, 50 times 100 is going to be 5 kilowatts. So it's going to consume 5 kilowatts of power, of energy going in per unit time. But if instead of 100 volts you put in 50 volts, and it's not going to draw 5 kilowatts, it's only going to draw 50 times 50, 2.5 kilowatts. So it's going to have its power output because it is a non-stabilized power supply. It draws a fixed amount of current in, and whatever current it gets in at whatever voltage is going to be its output power. And it's going to drive things like flap motors. For example, the flap motors in the flap electronic control unit, well, the flap drive unit actually, is the flap motors in the aircraft do draw power from the electrical bus, and they are, if we go to flap trim indicator, flap motor 2, you'll see here, the flap motor is an AC source, so it runs on 115 volt AC, but it only has a 5 amp breaker, no stabilized power supply. So whatever the input voltage is, that's how fast the flap motor is going to go. If the voltage goes high, flap motor is going to run faster. If the voltage goes low, flap motor is going to run slower. If the voltage is 10 volts, the flap motor is going to essentially crawl. That's the point. Versus if you have something like a CPU, typically computers, here you go. IRU number 1, secondary power supply input, minimum volts 18, stabilized true. So whatever the return value is for the power consumption is always stabilized such that it consumes the same amount of power regardless of what the input voltage is, within limits. The min volts here defines what the stabilization limit is of the power supply. If this value goes below, the input voltage goes below 18, effectively it shuts off the power supply, it goes to 0 volts, 0 power consumption, and the device just shuts down. So yeah, if your input volts go too low, and you can see here the input volts are somewhat different for different kinds of devices. So usually fairly sensitive devices have a somewhat higher, like 18, 19 volts. Things that have CPUs in them, things that have fairly sensitive electronics in them, have a fairly high level of input voltage stability. Actually, VHF-COM1 should be also 18 volts because that's CPU driven. But for example, essential AC transfer control, that is a simple electronic unit. That is a very, very simple electronic thing. Wouldn't the IRU under volt conditioning cause the unit to go into internal battery? There's no internal battery on the IRU here. Captain Crash. It has 2 power supplies, and if it loses both, it's bye-bye IRU. The IRU is just going to reset. So IRU1, you have IRU1 secondary power supply and IRU1 primary power supply. And, oh, by the way, so that's not entirely the rest of the file here. These are the load definitions, but if we go really far down, we go down here into bus setup. So bus setup goes last, and buses are these guys here. Those are the interconnects. So say we have ADG bus, type AC, and endpoint definitions are what devices are connected to that part. So let's go to ADG bus here, and you can see we have here, it has endpoint ADG, which is the air-driven generator. Then we have endpoint CB ADG bus feed, that's this guy. Then we have blah, 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 some other parts. But for example, if you go to AC utility bus 2, AC util bus 2, this diagram does not list all the devices on AC util bus 2. Well, in this case, it might, but if we go to AC bus 2, here we go, AC bus 2, we do, on this diagram here, I only list parts that are actually that are important. So ties, interconnects, contactors, and that's about it. But you can see there's a lot more devices on AC bus 2 that are not listed here. Flap motor 2, SATCOM, surface position indicator on the right-hand side, ice detection number 2, and so on and so forth. And I'm actually gonna show you exactly where IRU number 1 connects. So CB for IRU number 1 connects up into DC essential bus. So that'll be this down here. We go to DC side, DC essential bus. Where are you? DC utility bus, DC utility, DC essential bus. There you go. So IRU1 main power supply sits off of here, but IRU number 1 also has a secondary power supply, which we can find down here. And that guy sits over on a completely different bus, which is the battery bus. So the IRU number 1 is connected both DC essential and the, where are you, battery bus. It feeds off of 2 buses. That's your backup basically for IRU integrity. If both go away, you've got other problems than IRU integrity. I can tell you that much. You lose both. You lose battery bus. Ugh. I couldn't imagine what would have happened. What had to have happened to the aircraft. And DC Essential as well, by the way. Because DC Essential, if you look at the way it's configured, DC Essential gets fed from 2 sources, which is aux bus 1 and aux bus 2. And aux bus 1 comes from Essential TRU number 2 and from Essential TRU number 1. Okay, so it's coming off of AC Essential bus, right? And Essential TRU number 2 goes through blah, 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 AC bus 2. You would immediately, you would have structural battery fire failure, yeah, I guess. But it's not just that, because even if you lose the battery here, the battery is down here. So here's the main battery and here's the APU battery. You lose both of them, you still have power on DC Essential bus, because DC Essential bus is fed from the AC side, and you don't need the batteries for the AC side to be powered. And even battery bus here, you can actually see is fed from also Essential TRU number 2 and Essential TRU number 1. So that one's also being fed from those sources. And there's also another source coming from main battery direct bus. So I couldn't quite imagine how you would lose power on here. You would have to have essentially the entire electrical network in the aircraft burn out. Yeah. And then I think you've got other problems. Just a thought. So yeah. That's our electrical network simulation, and it's all running in the aircraft in real time. This is actually one of the earliest pieces of code that I've written. And as usual, we have system display overload happening in full-blown case here. What's next on my backlog? IRS usually have an internal battery to deal with transient dropouts. Not the laser ref. Primary RS feed is DC, so it doesn't need its own battery. Both feeds are DC, actually, in this case. Reflected reality sim. There is no internal battery, at least not that I'm aware. Yeah, so yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, so so input power requirements for Honeywell's Laser F6, which is the thing that is in the aircraft. If you want to, you can look this up yourself. Internal power supply, I'm sorry, input power requirements, blah, 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 from either primary 28 VDC power, secondary input power source. This could include a 28 VDC power source, 28 VDC battery, with priority being given to the primary power source. Maximum power, blah, 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 20 watts, nominally 20. What's not on my backlog? I don't know, I'd have to look. Right now, I've just been sort of talking to you guys. FMC code, I guess. More of it anyway. But yeah, 20. So the way that the way it's plumbed up in the Challenger is you have two 28 VDC sources to the IRSs, and there's no internal battery. I don't know why they designed it like that. I'm not aware of the Challenger having an IRS battery anywhere. I looked. You can be sure that I looked in the manual and doesn't talk anything about a battery there. So I'm assuming there is none. I also looked in the AMM. Doesn't have that either, or doesn't mention a battery either. Because if there was a battery, you would expect there to be servicing instructions for it, because batteries need servicing. But there are none. So yeah. So what DMEs are we using for updating right now? SLC NIT. So these two guys. Yeah, I mean, with two DC feeds coming off of pretty critical buses, like if you lose DC Essential bus, you lose, for example, the standby instrument system. There is no internal battery in the standby instrument system. So, and that is kind of an important system. So the Challenger, you have to understand, the way that the Challenger's avionics is designed is largely based around DC power for the avionics. AC power on the Challenger is only ever used for high power stuff like flap motors, hydraulic pumps, that kind of stuff. Galley power, that kind of stuff. That's AC. For sensitive electronics, any kind of displays, anything with a CPU on the Challenger is always fed by DC. So it's not like on a. I was really perplexed when I saw that on the Airbus. You know, you got like certain screens. There we go. Switch to BORs. Like on a Challenger, yeah. On a on an Airbus, you have things like BUD. Okay, so we're navigating off of BUD. So on the Airbus, what I was really surprised is that you have certain screens are fed from AC, and some other screens are fed from DC power, which is really strange to me, because that means that there has to be an AC to DC conversion power supply inside of that screen. On the Challenger, that is not the case. On the Challenger, you have let's go unpack all of this away. On the Challenger, all of these screens, every piece of computerized electronics that you see in here, all of that is DC fed from the DC system. So there is no AC backup, I guess, or something for any part of the aircraft's avionics. So that is why you have so much damn DC power, so many DC sources on the aircraft. It's because it's all entirely DC for the avionics anyway. For non-avionics stuff, sure, you have AC sources, but primarily it is a DC aircraft for the avionics, which kind of makes sense. Honestly, I couldn't really imagine why Airbus designed the avionics that way. I think it's kind of dumb, because internally you cannot drive an LCD screen. Well, you cannot drive a computer off of AC power. It doesn't work that way. So for all the screens and all this sort of avionics in an Airbus that can be driven off of AC, there has to be an internal power supply, which means there has to be power conversion circuitry. There's losses in there. You're gonna get heat in the avionics bay. Then you gotta ventilate that. Then you gotta have backup systems for when the ventilation fails. I mean, you're an Airbus driver, so you should probably know how complicated the avionics ventilation system is, and it like circulates freaking air-conditioned air and just natural convection and stupid stuff. They're really simple AC DC principles on 2 diodes, right? Oh, no, by 12 life. You can't do that when you have anything in there having to do with avionics. 2 diodes are going to give you a horrible ripple on a power supply. And it's going to mess up your AC network as well. Oh, not quite. Not too badly anyway. No. You need a lot more in a power supply than that. First of all, you need input filtering. Power supply, an AC to DC power supply, especially a stabilized one, this is an important detail. Yeah, so the DC wouldn't be stable. Yeah, that'd be a little bit bad. The AC does a lot of the cleaner plugs, the cleaners in. Yeah. So, I mean, there are AC outlets in the Challenger as well in the Galley, because, I mean, your cooking stuff is AC. It doesn't make sense to have a DC. But other than that, it's the avionics. It's anywhere you have a computer chip, any kind of memory, any kind of detailed, CPU running anything, you have to have DC in there. And a fairly clean and stable DC. You can't just, go and throw a truckload of ripple into a CPU and not have it blow up. So you're going to have, first of all, for a simple power supply, first of all, you cannot trivially, well, I mean, you can, but first of all, these are effectively the same kind of power supplies that you have in your computer. And those things, if you look at the average efficiency of a power supply in a computer, it's about, call it 80% efficient. A little bit better than that usually, but it's about 80% efficient. So let's say your avionics bay consumes, a kilowatt of power. That means 800 watts is used for the actual avionics stuff, and 200 watts is heat being emitted in there. Now imagine that instead of having just a few sort of high power TRUs, transform rectifier units, let's assume that you don't do that. You don't use DC in a couple of big high efficiency devices, but instead every damn piece of these electronics has to have its own power supply. You think they're going to be 80% efficient? Nah, man. You're going to be looking at more like 70 to 60% efficiency if you have, like, each one of them has to have its own AC power supply. And it's just tiny extra losses of power that you have to effectively ventilate, right? It's the energy has to go somewhere. Energy is conserved, and unfortunately you got to get rid of it. So you just end up with tons of avionics fans and a bunch of noise in the cockpit just trying to ventilate away the cooling fan air and that kind of stuff. It's just dumb. Yes, they are in the TRU bay. Yes, they are in the nose. Maybe for redundancy, a generator in AC anyway. I can split the DC converters to many converters and the power supply isn't that expensive. Every computer has one. Snap pitch, yes and yeah, essentially. But the thing is, you still have to have a transform rectifier unit because not everybody's going to have an AC this input. So things like tiny sensors that use DC power are not going to have their own AC power supply. Which is going to be a huge thing for a tiny sensor. So you still have a DC network. You still have transformer rectifier units. Even in the Airbus, it's like 3 or 4 of them. And go up in flames. Ooh. That was surprising there was no fire protection there. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, there isn't. That's bad. But anyway, that'd be bad if that happened in flight. But even the Airbus still has transformer rectifier units. Same for the Boeing. Still has TRUs. It's just, for nautical panels is robust. My sailing adventures. But you also now have a bunch of distributed power supplies all over the place just for AC, which I think is kind of dumb. If your device takes DC internally, hook it up to the damn DC network and just be done with it. Anyway, just sort of, it's a lot easier to make a power supply that is reliable, high efficiency, when you only have to make a few of them. And you can make internal, internal power conversion stages for CPUs. For example, you cannot feed 28 volts DC into a CPU; it'll still blow up. You need like 2 volts. So for CPUs, you still end up having to have a small power supply in there. Yeah, DC, AC, DC. You still end up having to have a small power supply in there, but it is effectively an onboard unit. So you're looking at like, a few power conversion transistors, some chokes, some inductors, and you're done. It's far less loss. Yeah. Yeah, and so by 512 life, it's 3.3 to 5 volts is the input power into the CPU. Internally, it still has some power conversion circuitry. You're going to have things like 1.5 volts internally inside of that CPU. Depends on the model, of course. But yeah. Overall, for the weird setup, unregulated DC gen when the engine goes into a converter, the two-sided system, which is transformer regulated AC, DC, transformer for DC. Wow, that's really weird, Captain Crash, because I can tell you that the one thing is you cannot generate DC. It's just not possible, at least not electromagnetically. All EM generators, all electromagnetic generators that use electromagnets, coils and magnets, and it can be permanent magnet, alternator, whatever. Any kind of magnetically based generator that is spinning off the engine is generating AC naturally. It has to, because of the fact that the only way you can get a core voltage on a CPU is somewhere between 1 and 1.5 volts. Yeah, so you gotta have CPUs that have internal weird conversion stages internally as well. Anyway, so any electrical generator that uses electromagnetism to generate, and which is essentially all of them, the only difference, solar doesn't. Solar, notably, is the one source you might say is truly DC, straight from the go. But any kind of mechanical generator that spins magnets around in coils, because the only way to go from a magnetic field to an electric field coupling is you have to move the magnetic charge, which means you're going to get a change in voltage. Just doesn't, there's no other way to do it, right? So you're going to get a change in voltage. So the only way to do that, naturally the output of the generator is internally always going to be AC. Then you rectify it, and that happens, for example, in the TBM's generator internally. There's some rectification circuitry there, and it spits out 28 volt DC. But if the stupid if it now outputs unregulated DC, that means that the DC voltage, there's no regulation for the AC to DC conversion stage, which means DC output out of the generator is going to depend on engine RPM. The faster it's spinning, the higher voltage, presumably. Not good, but whatever. Then you got to stick it through a bunch of, again, go from DC to AC. Dynamo is just a particular type of generator. It's a permanent magnet dynamo. Yeah. Now I'm going to go from DC to AC. Ugh, it's all dumb. So many conversion steps in there. Probably half the power is lost between coming from the generator or the mechanical load on the engine. More than half of it is lost before it actually gets to the target device. Somewhere along the path. Efficiency in aviation, perfect stuff. I mean, not just aviation generally, and any time you have, even the way that we use DC to AC sounds complicated. Yeah, not that complicated. Effectively, you set up like oscillators and that kind of stuff. DC to AC is not that complicated. Now, DC to DC voltage conversion, that's fucked up. I can tell you that. That's one of the reasons why DC power lines are so friggin' expensive. is because not, all for burning dinosaurs. All from burning dinosaur poop. Yeah. One of the problems for long-range power transmission via DC lines, great idea. You don't have any AC inductive coupling or any AC capacitance coupling. Probably, well, yeah. So one of the reasons, for example, why you cannot transfer, unregulated DC to regulated 20-volt DC. So, man, that sounds complicated. Anyway, so one of the reasons why any kind of long-range transmission lines that have AC on them have to be above ground. You cannot do AC long-range. So reflected reality, it actually isn't the case. AC probably thought that it'd be more efficient for energy transfer. Yeah, possibly. So yes and no. Complicated. But anyway, it's fewer conversion stages. If you can take AC directly off the generator, do some stabilization for the generator, run effectively like the IDGs on the Airbus. They are fluid coupled and they are RPM regulated such that they always produce the same AC voltage regardless of the engine speed. So by 512 live. So high voltage AC and high voltage DC, it's the reason why for AC lines you see them always being above ground for long range transmission. You can do short range underground, but not very long. For long range transmission of power, it's a CSD, constant speed drive. The reason why you always see them going above ground is because of a thing called capacitive and inductive coupling. There's only a problem with AC. Effectively, the fact that the AC voltage polarity changes in the line 50 or 60 times a hertz, 50 times or 60 times a second, is effectively it induces magnetic fields around it. And that then couples to anything else around it and induces eddy currents in it. Effectively, you're creating like a big capacitor between the power line and the ground. And the closer together they are, the stronger this coupling effect is. Effectively, you're sort of radiating away power, capacitively coupled and inductively coupled to the ground. So what do you think happens if you put a high voltage AC line and stick it into the ground, mere inches away from soil? And it rains, let's say, even better, when it's a very highly conductive medium. You're just losing power like crazy through that AC inductive coupling. That is why for AC transmission you have to go high above ground. Conversely, that's why neon light glows. Yeah, exactly. Effectively, you're getting eddy currents in there. The box is about 1 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot. It had 5 cooling fans on ground obstacles, ran cooling the air. Fans were wired in a series in some way, which meant one fan failed really fairly. The other fan was almost a guarantee within 5 hours. Oh man. You could dispatch with one fan failed, but there was another internal. It effectively impossible to determine if you had a fan failure. Yeah. That's always fun. Damn. So, the only way to get high power, high voltage transmission below ground for any length of distance is you have to go DC. You have to go DC, high voltage, so that you have low current, because again, you have current losses if you have very high current. So you want low current, high voltage, DC. Problem is, you don't get that out of a power plant. A turbine-driven power plant, regardless if it's steam, water, nuclear, doesn't really matter what it is. As long as it is outputting AC power, you now have to you cannot put that directly on a DC power line, obviously, right? So it's got to be first switched over. Here's another problem. Those AC generators coming off power plants, they output fairly high voltage, but not super high voltage. It's not 500 kilovolts, not 500,000 volts. It's like 5,000 volts, right? So it's fairly high, but not high enough for transmission. You have to go from 5,000 to 500,000, let's say, for a transmission line to be efficient. But you want to go from AC to DC. So first of all, what do you got to do? first of all, you have to step up in AC. You cannot you cannot step up trivially anyway that amount of power on DC. It's just not possible. The device would be giant and it'd be essentially it'd be melting lead. It would be that hot. So first of all, in AC, you got to convert up to a high, very, very high voltage. Then you have to do rectification. So you have to have giant rectifiers, effectively a giant power supply that takes an AC input, flips it over to DC. Cool. Then you send that DC over to the other side. Now what do? You cannot feed DC, you cannot feed super high voltage DC to a house, so it'll explode. Yeah. This battery tech gets better. Would it be better? Would there be a better way to use it behind capacitor to better regulate DC input? There are some fundamental physical limits to that. Anyway, so you get at the other end of the high voltage DC HVDC power line, right? So now you have 200 or 500,000 volts of DC power on your hands. Now what do you do with it? You got to feed it to a home or neighborhood or house or whatever. You cannot feed 500,000 volts to a house DC because the thing will immediately jump to the nearest conductor and it'll melt and burn the entire house down in about a microsecond. So I don't really have anything to contribute. Just want to say hello. Thank you. Thanks, Hallie Pally. Welcome. That's you too, Chris. How are you doing? Anyway, so 500,000 volt DC. What do? Well, you cannot step down that level of voltage on DC. Any kind of that level of conversion, any high power voltage change that we can do is we do it using transformers. And if you know transformers, they're magnetically coupled. And again, we are at the interface between electric and magnetic. And again, electric and magnetic interaction requires AC. You have to have a change in current in order to induce a magnetic field. It doesn't work otherwise. So, or to generate an eddy current in the other side and generate actual power transfer. The only way to do that is you go from high voltage DC to high voltage AC. So there's there's an inversion step, and high voltage DC to AC. That's expensive. Like that's one of the reasons why HVDC lines are that expensive, because at the ends those rectification and inversion stages are hugely expensive. And then you can finally use a giant transformer to go to lower voltage AC, something like 25,000 volts. You go to a distribution transformer in a neighborhood, and from there you chop out your individual power lines at 100 to 300 volts or whatever you want to do. But yeah, that's the reason why these things are so complicated. That's why we don't have HVDC everywhere, and that's why HVDC is extremely expensive whenever you want to do it. Not to mention the fact that whenever some idiot wants to dig underground to put in a giant thyristor for HVDC power lines, yeah, those things are going to be ginormous. Those things are like building sized. Yeah. It's like the size of your house. Imagine that. So yeah, those things are huge, and they're expensive. Like you have many of these components have tons and tons of semiconductor material in them. Yeah, human for comparison, just for reference scale. They have tons and tons of semiconductor material in them, like things like germanium and indium, and those are expensive materials. Anyway, so that's why you can't use HVDC everywhere. And anyway, I mean, yes, HVAC is slightly less efficient. Yeah. This guy's got balls of steel. Well, hopefully very well insulated steel, but you get the point. Well, it's probably shut off, obviously, but you get the point. This guy's a pro. So yeah, you should see what the arcs in these things look like. If you think you've seen a high voltage, if you've seen a an AC arc, you ain't seen nothing what a DC arc looks like. That's one of the big dangers about high voltage DC power. Things like, you know, you're looking at something like the output out of a solar farm. You take like 2000 volts DC. That shit's scary. High voltage AC, um, sure, you know, one of the neat things about AC is because you essentially have the voltage depleting down to 0 volts for a brief period of time, like 50 or 60 times a second. One of the neat things is if you pull a high voltage AC arc apart from itself, just beyond the sort of establishing limit, there's a good chance that by the time the voltage decays, the ionized channel through which the arc was essentially flowing in the air gets sufficiently low conductivity that the arc will not restart. So interrupting a electric boom should not be allowed to hear that. A high voltage AC arc can be interrupted more easily than a high voltage DC arc because a high voltage DC arc keeps the ionized channel constant. So you can essentially take like a 300 volt DC line and you can pull it apart about 5 or 6 centimeters, completely beyond the range of where an AC arc would remain, and the thing will just keep on arcing through. One of the big dangers of having a very large, very high power solar installation is because you have high voltage, you have like 1000 volt DC coming out of those solar panels, and when you have an arc and when you have a short somewhere in there, oh boy, does it catch fire real quick. And it's not easy to extinguish because it's high voltage DC. It doesn't really want to stop the arc whenever there's any kind of separation. It just wants to keep pumping energy in there, and there's already an ionized channel, so it just keeps going. Yeah. So HVDC arcs are even scarier than HVAC arcs. I mean, still HVAC burns buildings down, so you know don't think that it's just a walk in the park. But it's just HVDC is like the next level of danger. So anyway, kind of liking this vid. Let me see. Good chance that the answer is yes. Again, I know which video you mean. YouTube today is a different video, but yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like that. What was the 600 volt DC? Now the normal mental note of that. I try to do too much solar on a sailboat. Yeah, don't do that. So the normal breakdown voltage for air is about 1000 volts per centimeter, right? So as soon as the guy goes more than 1 centimeter away from that point there, you effectively have not enough voltage to sustain a normal air gap. But the problem is because that voltage does not go down. I'm sorry, because that power keeps being pumped in, that ionized channel never stops. It is constantly ionized. And the breakdown voltage of an ionized channel is much, much, much lower. It's like 1 volt per centimeter or something like that, tiny, right? So, or a couple volts per centimeter. So effectively, it's like you're drawing a virtual power cable out of there, and it doesn't stop. If it was AC, the constant switching on and off of the voltage would effectively destroy that channel very, very quickly. It would essentially let the air cool off ever so slightly below the ionization limit. But because this is DC, you can easily pull it like probably 10, 15 centimeters away, and the channel just keeps going. 600 volts AC would never be able to sustain this kind of an arc. So yeah. I mean, there's some help in the fact that he's putting it vertically so that it, like high voltage DC arc. There was a nice video by some guys. I don't know, maybe Electro Boom had it in his channel. I remember there was some guys were just pulling like a 10 centimeter arc with just 200 volt DC solar power. So yeah, very, very dangerous. So be sure to have lots and lots of protection systems on your solar installations. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna take a quick. Actually, well, I'm gonna wrap up the stream here, folks. I gotta take a leak and kind of run out of stuff. We're just jibber jabbering here about power and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we probably should wrap it up here. You can see it does work. Yeah, Byte 512, that was a CRJ, I think, having a crash. He's flying. Cool. Match is streaming. Oh, cool. Well, then we shall post. Cool stuff. Yeah. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Let me bring up this here stupid thing. And where's Matt? Yeah. Which and Matt. Yeah, there we go. So guys, I'll see you around. Much love, much thanks for stopping by, and yeah, I'll see you folks later. Yeah, it's flying the TBM. So have a good one. Give Matthew a lot of love, a lot of follows, a lot of stuff for Twitch, and I'll talk to you guys later. Have a fun, folks. Fun time, folks. See you around. Bye.